Welcome to the podcast, the Special Educators Corner. My name is Karsten Gundersen, and I wish you a most warmly welcome to my corner of special education. In this year's summer series, you will have the opportunity to hear a total of 8 conversations in Norwegian and English. Some are related to the theme of Season 6, rare diagnosis, and some about more independent topics. In this first episode, you will hear my conversation with Kourtney Barnum, educational specialist at the Rett University. When planning for the episodes of this season, Rett Syndrom was one of the diagnoses I wanted to learn more about. So I'm truly grateful to Kourtney for taking the time to join this episode, to learn me and hopefully you as a listener more about this syndrome. During this conversation, we talk about what Rett syndrome is, communication, how to best facilitate learning, lifelong perspective, among other things. Now, my conversation with Kourtney. Excellent. And with that, I would like to welcome to the podcast corner of special education and a new episode in the series Let's Talk About. And the topic of this episode is Rett syndrome. And it's part of the current season, which is season 6, and where the main topic is rare diagnosis. And as a part of this show, some of the topics I have myself more knowledge about than, for example, the topic of this current season, and that is why I invite different professionals and experts to both educate me and you as a listener about the topic of this episode. So with that, I would like to welcome today's guest. Why don't you give a short introduction of yourself and your role?
Thank you for having me. My name is Kourtney Barnum. I am an educational specialist for Rett University. I have been working with Rett University since 2018, but my experience with Rett syndrome actually goes back to birth because I'm also a sibling. My sister lived with Rett syndrome for 51 years, and so it parlayed into my current career, and that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I was a special education teacher before I started doing educational consulting with Rett U.
Correct. And we'll talk about Rett University in just a bit, but
Yes.
let's just get the basics out of the way, because Rett syndrome is, a part of the group that I would call rare diagnosis.
Very much.
Yeah. And so, what is Rett syndrome?
Rett syndrome is a disorder that is affecting mostly girls, but does affect boys as well. It is a mutation of the MECP2 gene that happens prenatally, but that does not show up until postnatal mutation. So girls and boys with Rett syndrome are usually born between they're born typical, and then between 6 and 18 months, they lose skills. Usually the ability to walk, the ability to talk, hand use are the big 3 that tends to be affected. Though with medical technology and things like that, we have more and more girls and boys who are talking and using some hand use and things like that. So it is very different to see, but most of our girls and boys are affected. It is genetic, but it is not inherited.
Correct.
It's a random mutation. It just happens. So they were the first. It was diagnosed in 1966, if I remember correctly.
First time,
Yes. And the first girl in the United States was actually diagnosed in 1986.
Correct.
And the genetic mutation was actually found in 1999.
Okay.
And we are now in the spot where in 2023, we have the first medication that helps with the symptoms of Rett syndrome. And we are also in clinical trials for genetic genetic, and I'm not very good with the science part of it, but they're looking at reversing the genetic mutation within the gene, and there's clinical trials for that.
Interesting.
So it's absolutely insane in my brain that it's happening, to be very honest with you. But yeah, it's a disorder, like I said, that affects mostly boys or mostly girls, and with some boys. And I think the biggest thing is our girls and boys are very much trapped in their bodies, because they don't have hand use, because they don't have functional hand use, and because they do not speak with their mouth. But what we have found, because of different technologies and stuff, is that our kids are literally trapped in their bodies, that they are very, very smart. They are very, very intelligent inside, but they don't have a way to get it out.
So, in your answer now, you also gave a short glimpse of the more historic perspective. So, where should we start now? I'm just curious to see, since you mentioned the historic timeline. I often ask this at the end of the conversation, but where do you see the progress in medicine, or, well, if you continue down the road for 5 to 10 years, where are we then?
I pray that we see clinical trials that are actually in full bloom and helping our girls and boys live the life that they deserve and not be trapped in their bodies anymore. I mean, if you would have told me honestly in 1999, when the gene, was found, and that, by 2025 that we would be in clinical trials, I would have laughed in your face, because it's just, it is such a rare disorder. And there was no information about it for the first my sister didn't get diagnosed until she was 21. So, there was not the information. So our goal with what we do is to get them ready for that cure, that's going to allow them to, read and write. I mean, they're doing it, but now with full use of their body, hopefully. That's where we're going, hopefully.
So when it comes to communication, and I would from your the description, I would presume that they use AAC to communicate.
They do. Most of our kids use eye gaze communication. And so that was where the big aha moment came, that our kids were much more capable than what people had given them credit for. But yeah, most of our girls and boys use eye gaze communication. We have some that do use touch. But for example, I know a young lady who she has use of her hands, and some pretty functional use of her hands. But when she has a seizure, she loses all ability with her body for about a week to 2 weeks. So even though we have girls that are more atypical Rett syndrome, most of them still use eye gaze communication, because that one of the biggest symptoms of Rett syndrome is apraxia. And it affects our girls and boys no matter what, whether they're atypical or typical, it affects them. So that eye gaze, because the brain and the eyes are so close together, that is still their most reliable form of communication.
Correct. And actually, the main topic of season 3 of this show was AAC. So if the US listener are interested in this, you should check that season out and following episodes. But you say that they are trapped in their own body. Could you elaborate around that?
What does that look like? So for example, like I said, most of our girls and boys, and I will speak more to girls because that is what most of our clientele is at this point. But most of our girls are literally at a regular intelligence level. But because they are non-speaking and because their hands don't work, they don't have a way to tell people what they know. As we say, Rett syndrome is very much it is not an input disorder. They input and take in everything that is said to them.
It's an output, correct.
Output disorder. And so And again, like I said, most of our girls and boys have apraxia, meaning their body does not listen to what they're trying to say. Their brain is saying one thing, their body is saying, doing something different. And so what happens with that is my girls will and boys will have issues with starting their body to do something or stopping their body to do something. So, for example, I'll use my sister as my best example. My sister would be walking along. She was mobile. She would be walking along, and then all of a sudden her body would just stop.
Okay.
And,
Out of the blue.
Out of the blue. And, a lot of times it was followed with a seizure as well. But, it was, or I'll watch my girls where they're like, I'll be asking them a question or asking them to do something, and they're like, their eyes are over here, I'm looking to the right, but you can see them trying to move their head to the right hand side and it won't go. Or even standing up or stepping up onto, a bus step. I have girls who won't step up on the bus step because of the depth perception issue. So it's those simple movements, even breathing. So a lot
even
of
breathing.
Girls,
okay.
Yes. Even a lot of my girls have their breath being held. Where we breathe, everything is fine. I have had girls literally their lips turn blue in front of me. They stop breathing, and it is not a behavior. It is not anything that they are causing to do. It is just a neurological glitch that they stop breathing. And they, we joke, we're like, because people are like, breathe. And I'm like, no, don't do that, because that makes their apraxia then get worse.
Yeah.
So, I'll look at my girls and be like, hey, I see your lips are turning blue. It's all good. Yeah. I'll wait for you, no problem. And it's even that simple everyday thing that we do is not just so simple for our girls and boys with Rett.
I have so many questions, so I don't know where to start because I truly, as I said in the introduction, I know very little about this syndrome and this diagnosis. So again, thank you very much for taking the time. But again, back to the basics. The name of the syndrome, Rett syndrome, the origin.
Was discovered by Dr. Andreas Rett.
Correct.
And I will tell you, I do not remember where. I know he's from Europe somewhere, but he was the one who found it. And actually, little aside, personal story, that was how we found out that my sister had Rett syndrome. Was her neurologist actually went to a conference over in Europe and saw this man standing there with a girl who could have been my sister's twin. And he went running up to him and said, sir, what does your daughter have? I have a patient who in Cleveland, Ohio, that looks just like her. And he said, this is not my daughter. This is my patient. She has Rett syndrome, and we're introducing it that today. And that was when we got the diagnosis, because before then she was severely, profoundly mentally retarded with a severe seizure disorder. So Dr. Andreas Rett is the one who discovered Rett syndrome and ran with it. And then Dr. Adrian Bird in 2007 is the one who was able to reverse Rett in mice models.
Correct. Okay. If one are talking as to a parent or because you said that to diagnose a child or a girl or a boy with a Rett syndrome, you mentioned that that's from a very early age. But how to best spot or what should one be aware of when it comes to the different diagnostic criteria?
So most of the girls and boys, you'll start seeing boys are a little different, because even with our girls, it's rare. With boys, it's even more rare because, they only have one X chromosome. So it is a lot more rare for our boys, and they are usually affected almost from the beginning, from birth. Whereas our girls, it's usually between 6 and 18 months. So I have had some families who recognize that there was something wrong, whether it be low muscle tone, not reaching those milestones of crawling, sitting up, things like that earlier. But for most of our families, they start noticing that, the skills that they once had are now just, not coming back, not coming
Yeah.
forward anymore. They go through kind of a regression of skills. They start, I know for my sister, she stopped talking, she stopped walking. So that they start noticing things like that. And then a lot of the times, the first diagnosis a lot of our families get is an autism diagnosis, because it's, the repetitive
Yeah.
hand
Yeah.
movements, things like that. And for a long time, Rett syndrome was on the autism spectrum disorder. It has been since taken off, once we got the genetic mutation of it. But what happens is they get the diagnosis, but then you meet the girls and you're like, no, that's not right. There's got to be something else, because they are very social. They are very social beings. And so then you have to go through the genetic testing and get the actual genetic testing for the Rett syndrome. But I would say the biggest thing I would notice is that regression.
Yeah, correct. And just looking at the normal milestones in development.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you said that it's when it comes to the variations or the balance between boys and girls. What numbers are we talking about?
So with girls, it is 1 in 10,000 births, and boys, it's 1 in 15,000.
Okay, so that's a big difference. Yeah.
There's a big difference, and I don't think it has changed recently. I have not looked recently, but I know that a lot of our boys, unfortunately, have passed away very early. And they are usually pretty severely affected. Though, again, changes with medical technology and things like that. We do have some boys that are up and walking and moving and things like that. So it really, Rett is such a different disorder because, you have it's a very large umbrella.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you. How the scale from the different individuals, and how what are we talking about in the different cases?
So I currently have a woman I work with who is in her late 30s, who is completely, chair bedridden, cannot move her body whatsoever. Has severe, very bad seizures, has a lot of, like, almost all of the extra symptoms that go with Rett syndrome, the apraxia, the breath holding, the seizures, the gastro issues, all of those things like that. And then we just met a new family whose daughter walks and talks and has hand use.
Okay.
So it is
Yeah.
literally, I will tell you, I didn't meet the first girl that could talk until it was just probably about 5 years ago. And she walked up to me and said, "Hi, how are you?" And I was like, my mind was just absolutely blown, because we didn't have before, there was not girls that were born that were talking. And, now it's kind of, you question how many different people are like, okay, what will so it really is, we have atypical Rett now that is popping up all over, and they have the genetic mutation, but they have a very rare atypical mutation.
Yeah. And speaking of the atypical, how new is that variation of Rett syndrome?
I would say it has been more pronounced, I would say, in the last 10 years,
correct.
that I would say I would start noticing things more on social media and in all the Rett groups that I started. I'm sure they've been around for a lot longer than that, but I would say it has become more and more mainstream in I would say 10 years, but I would say more so probably in like the last 6 years.
Correct. And when a child has been diagnosed with Rett syndrome, what do we know about how it affects the family and the daily life and yeah.
Rett syndrome is, I wish I could, make it all Pollyanna perfect, but it's not. It is a very, very hard diagnosis. Because I think, I was born after my sister, so I never saw the regression, but I've heard my siblings talk about it. And when my mom would talk about it. so the regression itself is hard. You have this child who is doing all these great things and then you lose
Yeah.
that. Like, that is mind blowing. And I think there is definitely a grief that goes there. And then you watch your child go from being able to do simple things like picking up blocks and putting them in a little container to, not being able to do anything with their hands or speaking. It is definitely a very difficult diagnosis in terms of seizures and all of the extra stuff that goes with Rett, the apraxia, the things like that. But at the same point, like, I meet my girls and I would not change. I know for myself, I would not change being my sister's little sister and at all. It's changed my world. And my clients that I have the pleasure and honor of working with are just, they're amazing. And so like it's really, really challenging, but it's also really, really beautiful.
Yeah. And speaking of, if one take a look at the timeline, if you could call it that, of the regression of the skills of a person, I would guess that it's quite individual. The regression itself.
The regression. I've had girls who have lost some skills, but then they really hit their regression later, like around the age of 6. I've had other families who their daughter didn't regress until like 10. So the regression is a little like, then she's one of my more atypical girls. It really just is very individual to the child. My sister was right on top, like 15 months. She started regressing and losing her skills. I've had other families who their daughter went through, never even really had a regression. They just started at 6 months. They started noticing that they were not making the milestones. So it really is a very individual thing.
But always, is it like at the start? Is it slowly regressing, or is it, and then speeding up, or how?
I know for my sister, and I can't speak for everybody, I know it was pretty rapid. Though I've had other families who just started, something's off. And then kind of, okay, well, let's keep kind of a couple little bit longer, okay, something else is going. Then they start getting some, getting more help. So it really, again, it's very individual.
Correct. And when it comes to because as I said, I have been doing some other recordings of other rare diagnoses, and and in one of these conversations we talked about the knowledge about these rare diagnoses, and in your experience, both when it comes to of course it's difficult to give a good enough answer, but the knowledge of Rett syndrome in Europe, the US, what do we know?
I always say don't Google it, because and people do, because even like when I go into work with schools, they're like, oh, well, I looked it up, and I'm like, oh God, okay, you got the old information. And unfortunately there's not as much new information about what is possible with Rett syndrome. It's still, if you look at a lot of the information that's out there, it still shows them having an intellectual disability. It's a very, I hate to say this, but a very negative kind of connotation. I know for my clients that I have in Europe, it's very much of, they can't learn. We just had a family in Europe that, they didn't think she was smart enough to continue with the education. They were like, nope, we're going to babysit them. We're going to put them in daycares, we're not teach them. In the United States, we still have some of that. It really kind of depends on where we're at in the United States. I know a lot of the times when I meet, when I meet teachers, it's, they're very much like, oh, we know something's there, we just don't know what, we don't know. But we still, again, have that, oh, well, they're intellectually disabled. They belong in a special ed classroom. They should not be with the regular ed. So there's still a lot of unlearning that needs to be done
Correct.
of what is possible with our girls. I mean, for example, we have a client who just graduated high school and just got accepted to a university.
That's success, I must say.
That's, so I mean, I have girls that are going into regular ed and reading and doing, doing the work. So it's, I think the biggest limitation on our clients or our kiddos is people's attitude and the knowledge that they don't know.
And when I first started this show back in the summer of 23, the main goal, which is still the main goal, is to talk about the more narrow topics. In this case, Rett syndrome, and to provide greater understanding and knowledge. So again, thank you very much for helping with that task.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned education, and that's always interesting when it comes to different kind of syndromes and diagnosis. What do these children need in kindergarten and school? You said that it's not when it comes to input, they have no difficulties, but when it comes to the more expressive side and to use AAC to communicate, how do they best learn?
Our kiddos learn they need supports. They need very big supports. I would say we have clients as young as 2 and 2, and we have clients as old as 60.
Okay.
And I will say the earlier you get our kids on a communication system, on an eye gaze communication system with a robust communication system, we're not talking 4 buttons. We're not talking yes, no, we are talking. I start my littles on a 7x7 grid.
Yeah.
They have a full language system in front of them. And we get a lot of pushback from that a lot of times because people are, no, we have to do, we have to put them on, 4 buttons and they have to show that they know 4 buttons before they can. No, we don't do that to typical kids. I have almost 3-year-old great nieces that are twins, and we have started talking to them before they were in the belly, like when they were in the belly, and we talk to them in full sentences and we talk to them about everything, and we're modeling language for them all the time. Why we don't want to do the same for our kids who have disabilities, I don't understand. But I have 3, and my youngest client is just turning 3. And she will get on her device and have is it a basic conversation? Yes, it's very similar to what I'm having with my great nieces. And she'll have a conversation with me using her eyes. So the very first thing I would say is getting them on the device and getting them language input from full language input from as early as age as possible. The other thing I would say is they need to be taught. They need to actually be taught. I think one of the problems, and I noticed this when I was a special ed teacher, and I noticed this throughout training through a lot of different places, is people are like, oh, they've got the device now, it's all just going to magically come to them. Oh, our kids still need to be taught. Our kids still need to learn how to read. So, for example,
like everyone else.
Right. They need to learn how to read it right. They need to learn how to go left to right with their eye gaze. They learn. So we have programs in place that we use that support them learning how to, the motor plan of moving their body left to right. We use, there's so many supports we put in place. They need a calm body. They need a regulated body. They need soft tech, meaning, yes, no cards and ABC cards and things like that allow them to answer easily without having to use their device. The device is a communication device. And I think that's one of the big issues that we have with our kiddos is that people see the communication device and they're like, oh, find the dog, show me blue, show me, no, it is a communication device. We're going to use the device to communicate. We're going to use soft tech, things like yes, no, things like that in order to show what we know.
Correct. And when it comes to, being in the classroom and differentiate the learning and the different tasks. And for a teacher that is listening to this episode and are either welcoming a child with Rett syndrome into the class, or are going to start with a class where there's a child with Rett syndrome, where should one start?
I would suggest, first off, kind of being just open and willing to learn. The success I see with teachers is it being willing to learn, because this is different than what they're used to. Same thing with my speech language paths. If you are meeting a child with Rett syndrome, you are meeting a child with Rett syndrome. Put away all your preconceived notions of what they should and shouldn't do, and just kind of be open to it. The next thing I would say is, and I'm going to plug us a little bit, check out Rett University, because if you go to our website, we have free lessons, we have courses, if you go to our social media, we post videos of our kiddos doing amazing stuff all the time, reading and writing and all the great stuff, being sassy as all get out, because God, they are sassy. The next thing I would say is figure out how to build a relationship with the child. Our girls, especially, I can't speak for all of the boys, but our girls, oh my God, they are such social beings. And if they don't feel, how do I say this nicely? If they don't feel that you believe in them, if they don't feel like you are a real person, they're not going to waste their time with you. They're going to shut down.
Yeah.
And I've learned that very quickly. My girls and my sister were my best people. Like, if they didn't like you, I was like, okay, I'm going to walk away from you.
They have to feel that you are invested in them.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Because they, again, going back to their body, they have a body that doesn't listen, that they cannot rely on, that they cannot, that they can't trust, for lack of, for lack of a better describing. And so they are reliant on the people around them. And if they don't trust you, it's not there. I will have my girls literally shut down, close their eyes, and pretend to be asleep, because they're like, nope, I'm not going to bother wasting my energy, the little energy that I have, on you.
Yeah.
So I would say build a relationship with them first, and then, presume potential.
Yeah.
Presume that they have the potential to learn, and then check out how to teach them best, and ask for help, because
talk to your parents, the family. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Talk to their parents, talk to their families, check out what is available in terms of, learning for our kids, because they can learn. Like I said, we just had a girl get accepted to college. Our girls and boys can read, our girls and boys can write, but they need patience. They need people who are going to understand that the supports that they need, the soft tech that we use, the time it takes, because again, thinking about an output, they're taking everything in, but their body's not working. So being able to, it can take 3 weeks for my girls to write 2 to 3 sentences, because it's not we pick up a pen and we can write, 2 to 3 sentences in 5 minutes. They have to keep everything straight in their head. They have to use yes and no, using the flip books and yes and no to write and keep the words all. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And I do writing with my girls, and I'm just like, God, you're so smart, because I can't do that. It's like, I can't keep all that stuff straight in my head. So, I would say build a relationship with them, and then learn about how to best support them and what supports they need in order to learn.
I was just thinking about, when it comes to using both the energy that one have and the long-term and the short-term memory. And when it comes to children with Rett syndrome, and you were saying how they choose to use the energy. What do we know? Because I would say that when we all wake up in the morning, you have fully charged batteries, and you're ready to go. Yeah. So what do we know about that when it comes to children with Rett syndrome?
So what I jokingly, but not so jokingly say is I jokingly say my girls have spoons every day. They have so many spoons that they're going to use. And some days they might only have two spoons because their body had a seizure in the
Yeah,
morning
yeah.
or they're having a really bad breathing day or they didn't sleep all the night before. But what I have found with my girls and boys too is they can be absolutely gutted,
Mm.
like just exhausted. I had one little girl one day, literally had been at therapies all day. She'd had intensive therapy all day. We had a session after school. I was literally expecting her to kind of be like half asleep the whole time. She worked the whole hour for me, like just, killed it. And that doesn't, but she also knows I'm going to be the one who's going to be taking the time to know her and know, okay, I see that you're really struggling right now. I'll give you a second where some people are, no, gotta go,
Yeah,
gotta go,
yeah.
gotta go. And that doesn't work. She's like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's on my time. They're kind of like cats. It's on their time. But, it's understanding, having a really good relationship with the families and understanding that they're going to tell me, hey, she had a really
Yeah,
rough day
yeah.
today. There was
You
lots of
get that text
seizures.
in the morning, and yeah,
Yes, you've got to have that communication to understand that, whether it was a seizure, whether it was, their medication didn't get taken that day because they threw it up or whatever it happens to be, or they're having really bad breathing issues in the middle of the night and they're not sleeping well. So they're exhausted or, they've been up since 2 o'clock in the morning. All of those things are going to affect how they work. One of the things though that we always say to my girls is I'm like, I know it's hard. I know it's hard. I know that your body's not listening. How, and then what supports can I put in place to support them so that they can still show what they know,
yeah,
but it's not so much work for them. That's why we do
yeah,
a lot of the soft tech and
yeah.
stuff like that, because they already know the motor plan. They don't have to think about it. It's finding those things like motor plan and things like that, that it's just automatic to their body,
Correct. Yeah,
that they don't have to think about what their body has to do.
yeah. So, as for every child and individual, routine and automatization, and you mentioned the soft technology and how one use the different kind of resources that one have, and based on from day to day and class to class and task to task. But you mentioned also, and we spoke about this earlier in conversation, Rett U. What is Rett U?
Rett U is an online quote unquote coursework for students with Rett syndrome and pretty much other complex needs as well. My business partner, Susan, is actually the co-founder of Rett University. She was working with children with autism and happened to have a little girl who was misdiagnosed, was diagnosed with autism, who was learning how to read and write and do all of these things. And then she regressed and she got chickenpox and she regressed and she was diagnosed with Rett syndrome. And that was when, and all Susan had heard about before that point was that our girls with Rett syndrome are intellectually disabled. So she was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And the girl had retained all of the knowledge that she had learned. And so that kind of parlayed Susan into working with more and more, like, of course, people got word of it and were like, okay, we need to go to, if you Google Rett University and Susan Norwell, you will see she's the person. That was, I will, and then, so she started Rett U. She worked, partnered with the not-for-profit that we are attached to that is called Girl Power to Cure. And her and the founder of Girl Power to Cure decided to start this because they wanted to get the information out there more because she was only one person. I had the pleasure of going to a training with her in 2015, it was, where I'm sitting there watching her and I was teaching at the time and I was watching what she was doing and I was like, oh my God, this is what this was what I wanted to do. When I was way back when, being 10 years younger than my sister, I wanted to learn how to talk to my sister. I wanted to know what was going on. I knew she was in there. How do I talk to her? So I walked up to Susan, funnily enough, and said, I have 2 questions for you. And she said, what's that? And I said, how do I, I said, is it too late for my sister? She was 48 at the time. Susan said, it's never too late to try a device with her. And I said, great. And she said, okay, what's your second question? I said, how do I get to be you when I grow up? And we trialed a device with my sister when she was 50. So I got to hear my sister talk for the very first time, which was absolutely amazing.
Can I imagine?
And then, I left teaching and started working with Susan. So what we do is we do, like I said, online courses that do have a charge, but you have access to them for a year. And it's, all the different things, how to model on the device, how to teach reading, how to teach making words, how to teach all of the things that we use. We are following a lot of the research from David Copenhaver and Karen Erickson but for Rett syndrome, because, that's what our focus is. We have free things. So when COVID hit, we had a bunch of free lessons that we did for our families, because all of a sudden our families were home and had they didn't know how to teach their kid, because, we got to do this. So we did a bunch of free lessons. We have web chats that we do monthly, that we do all sorts of different subjects on. And then just so happened, normally before COVID, we were going out and going to different, we were traveling to different places and doing sessions and things like that. And then it just so happened that right before COVID happened, one of our clients from Switzerland was supposed to come over and do an intensive with Susan at her house, in her office. And right before she was supposed to come over, the doctor said, no, she can't, because she had surgery. And they were like, nope. And so they figured out how to do it remotely. And so literally we were kind of in the process of starting remotes, and then COVID hit. And so we started doing remotes. And so literally we do remote training sessions. We'll do remote consults with our girls and boys. We work with them via, computer. We actually, for most of the devices, we actually can remote into the device. And so
Correct.
we can model on the device, and we
Remote
do
access.
sessions.
Yes.
And Susan does not travel anymore, but I will travel. So I will go to different school districts depending on, what's going on, and train the staff. Like I just was in a school in a different state for one of my girls who's going to high school. So I trained her high school staff on how to work with her and what they needed to know about her and things like that. But our goal is to help people understand what is possible with our girls and boys. And like I said, we have social media and stuff. So there's all sorts of great video. Because I think that's a thing too, is when people see it in action, they're like, oh, wow. Whereas, if we say, when I say, hey, we teach kids how to read and write, and they're like, no, you don't. Like, no, you don't. And I'm like, no, we really do. Here's a video. So, because they see our girls and boys stuck in these bodies, and they're like, there's no way they can do that. And then they do. Or our girls come off and pop off with some smart aleck remark, because they are cheeky. They are so cheeky, and they're sassy as all get out. And I'm like, if they're not sassy with you, they don't trust you, because they are. So that's what Rett University is. And there's now 4 of us. We have a speech language pathologist on staff with us now. And we have 4 consultants altogether, and we working to help people understand how to best support our kids with Rett syndrome, but also with other disabilities that are rare, because our more complex kids, a lot of the stuff that we do with our kids with Rett works with our more complex kiddos.
Correct. And I was also wondering, if we head back to the daily life and education and learning, it's always the matter of the input of different sensoric stimulation, and what's important to think about, to have with you when it comes to that matter.
Definitely thinking about the apraxia and stress
Yeah.
level. So thinking about sensorily, I mean, I have girls, again, it's a very unique depending on the
Yeah.
girl. It sensorily, but I mean, I would say that the thing that affects my girls the most is the
Mm.
apraxia. And so if people are rushing, if people are, you know,
Yeah.
that's not going to work with my girls. They're going to shut down because that's too much stimulation for them. That is way too much stimulation for them. So we promote very, I am a very high energy kind of goofy person and very like, but I have learned how to
Yeah.
pull myself back in order to get the best out of my students.
So
You know,
so you have to like go into a low arousal mode. Is that correct? Yeah.
yes, with really good face
Yeah.
affect. It's it's like chill, but like big face affect. It's the best way I can describe it. And they, because again, the more excited that they get, the harder their apraxia starts playing into
Correct.
gear. And then it ends up, stress level. Like my one little girl is starting school today. And her little body this morning, you could just like, she was shaking. And I'm like, big deal. You're starting, a new grade.
Mm.
And so that means all new people for
Yeah.
her. Yeah, she'll have some friends in her class, but she's got new people, and I could see it on her face today, and I could see it in her body movement. So mine was really, we got this. We're gonna handle this all morning, and telling her, I know you can do this, and because again, we keep that stress
Yeah.
level down,
And just be there
the better.
as a support along the
Yeah,
way.
exactly.
Yeah. But when it comes to the loss of motor skills, and I would say that I would guess that this is quite different from individual to individual. But when it comes to transportation and moving around, is it by wheelchair or what do what do we use?
So most of our girls, even if they are mobile, have a
Yeah,
wheelchair. For longer distances,
correct.
for days when the body's not working, for days when the seizures are out of control. So most of our girls, like we had a travel wheelchair for my sister because she could go for a little bit and then
Yeah,
like body would stop. So most of our girls and boys are in wheelchairs. Though we always talk about keeping them up and moving as much as possible,
yeah,
whether it be in a gait trainer, whether it be, the contraption that has them walking on
yeah.
the treadmill. They are constantly doing intensive therapies, at least over here in the States. They're constantly doing intensive therapies to help keep their body moving and as flexible as possible. Pools. A lot of my girls love to swim, and they get in put them in the pool with the raft underneath
Yeah.
around the waist, and they're like floating around, bicycling their little legs around all over the place. So, keeping them up and moving. But yes, most of our girls are in wheelchairs. Um, with those that are mobile, they are it really kind of, again, is very individual. We have girls, my sister had a very, very odd gait. She was very slow. We have girls that run, and again, it's mind blowing to me watching them run. I'm like, oh my God, look at them run. But they also have a hard time stopping. So it's interesting. But definitely wheelchairs are the big one. We have girls that ride specialized bikes, things like
Yeah.
that. So, but wheelchairs are the big one.
Correct. And with that, you also now gave an answer to the next question: how to facilitate the physical education, and so as you mentioned, it varies from individual to individual and the different stages of that individual. But
Right.
it's one thing when it comes to reading and writing, but if we are talking about like mathematics and the more basic topics in school, any good tips there?
We again, all soft tech. It's when it comes to my so reading and writing is always our focus, because the very simple fact is if you cannot read and you cannot write with a full access to alphabet, you are not fully communicative.
Correct.
So that is always our focus. But I do have girls that love math and things like that. So it's to me, I'm always talking to my teams about what is the goal? What are you trying to get them to show? Is it that they can do addition? Or is it they know how to set up the problem to do addition? Because those are going to be two different things. And I'm always, telling my teams, when you're looking at science and social studies and math, you want to look at what's the most important thing that you're trying, what is the goal? If the typical kid's goal is to write a paragraph about George Washington, for example, okay, the goal is it the writing, or is it expressing information about George Washington? So how are we going to do that? Is it that you want her to write a sentence about George Washington of what she's learned? Okay, then that's what the goal is. So it's differentiating it to a point of what she can do or he can do that's going to best show what they know.
Yeah.
Rather than, one of the big important things that we always talk about with Rett syndrome is thinking about cognitive demand versus motor demand. So if we're doing something really, really high cognitive demand, math, writing, things like that, then we're going to keep that motor demand as low as possible.
That's a good tip.
And same thing, right? If we're doing something really high motor demand, then we're going to keep that.
So you have to balance it.
You have to balance it, because if you don't, then you're going to end up with the apraxia and all the other things. That's when my kids' stress levels go through the roof, and then they can't do anything. They can't show you what they know because they're out of balance.
Correct.
That's why we, when we're writing goals and things, we're always like calm, regulated body. And people are like, oh, then, it's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal, because if my kids don't have their calm, regulated body, they can't show you what they know.
Yeah, correct.
So.
Yeah. And, speaking of, you said that learning how to read and write is, the main focus, because if you, mention those two skills is also giving the individual it gives you the possibility to express yourself and to communicate. So I think that gives a good transition over to the last topic of this conversation, and that is the lifelong perspective from child to youth and to adults. What do we know?
So I think, and again, I'm going to kind of go a little bit personal here. When my sister was born, we were told she wouldn't live past her 20th birthday. She ended up living until she was 51. So, but I've had girls who unfortunately have passed away at the age of 7. I've had girls who've passed away younger. I've had girls, who passed away older. The simple fact that I would say is, what I look at is getting them on those devices as soon as possible. Start teaching as soon as possible, because that gives them more. Not only does reading and writing and communication make them, able to express themselves, that gives them something they can do without anybody else. Like our girls who are older, who've learned how to read, can use Voice Dream and other, programs that we use to read independently.
To become an independent person. Yeah.
Right. When you can't use your body for anything else, you're kind of stuck in front of, people will put you in front of a TV and I know what that happened with my sister all the time is I'd walk in and she'd be she's watching TV, because what else can you do with her? So being able to read by yourself and read independently, that opens up a whole different world of life for you. So to me, and then I also think about communication in terms of, I have girls in their 20s who are talking about moving out of their parents' house. They're like, bye mom, bye dad, we want to go. They want boyfriends. I mean, it is hysterical. They're 20s. They're in their 20s and they're like, nope, And so again, my thought process is, how do we teach them how to advocate for themselves? How do we teach them how to communicate and direct somebody? Because again, you can live on your own, but you're going to need people there to assist you because you cannot use your body.
Yeah.
So that means you're going to have to direct people. So I think, going from, there's so much emphasis on our younger kids, and I agree, get them going on the device, get them learning, and going as soon as possible. But what I think I also look at in terms of adults is that we have a lot of families out there that don't have girls, and that don't have devices, that don't know what is possible. And I will tell you, I have my oldest clients right now are 38 and they are funny as all get out. And they're, one is just starting on her communication journey. And again, that's when you see just literally how much input has been given in and how they haven't the conversations I have with my adult women are mind blowing because, it makes me realize what they've had swimming around in their head their whole life that they haven't had the ability to say. And so to me, it's helping them continue to grow and learn, just like we as adults, as typical adults, need to do from, birth to that's the same thing that we need to be doing with our girls and boys with Rett syndrome, is helping them have a full, complete life. So.
Well, I think that that serves as a great ending before the two final questions. So we are closing in on 60 minutes, and it's going like that. But Kourtney, with what all we've been through during this conversation, what is the takeaway? What do you want the listener to take home from this conversation?
That our girls and boys with Rett syndrome are capable. That if you take the time to learn how to teach them, and teach them that they can learn and that they can, God, when they trust you and they give you a piece of them, it is the most beautiful thing. I am so blessed with the girls and boys that I work with. So, give them, literally go into it with an open mind and just let and learn because they have so much to teach you.
Perfect. And you also already mentioned the website and of Rett U,
Yes.
which is absolutely a resource one should take a look on. But do you have a closing tip of the day?
Just remember that with our kiddos with Rett, that it is not an input problem. It is an output problem. And that like I said, if you take the moment to slow down and listen, they have so much to say, and that you can never judge a book by a cover, because let me tell you what, my girls and boys are so much more than the covers of their, they are so much more than their covers. They are so much more. And when they trust you, like I said, they're so much fun. And if you don't get the sass, then that's a you problem, because they are so sassy. So.
Excellent. Perfect. Once again, Kourtney, thank you very much for taking the time to join the Corner of Special Education. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That concludes volume 1 of this year's summer series. But before our ways part, remember to follow the podcast on Spotify or where you listen to podcasts. Also, remember to follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Also, if you want the latest news and posts from the blog, you can sign up to the newsletter from spesblog.no. If you have any comments or want to get in touch, don't hesitate to send me a PM or email at karsten@spesblog.no. As always, I really appreciate if you rate, share and recommend the podcast. Finally, thank you to all of you who have listened to this episode, and a warm welcome to new listeners and followers. And a special thanks to Kourtney for taking the time to join me for this episode. If you'd like to make a voluntary contribution to the podcast and blog, you can find further details in the description of this episode. I hope to meet you again in the next episode of the Special Educator's Corner. Until then, take care. Now, a small preview for Volume 2 of the summer series.
På noen måte. Det mer en annerledes måte å eksistere I verden. Så vi bytter litt på egentlig hva vi bruker, ettersom hvem vi snakker med. Og jeg bruker jo som regel de begrepene som individene selv